Around IT in 256 seconds by Tomasz Nurkiewicz. Episode 63. Logging.
You can't look at your application all the time. Instead, it should leave some sort of persistent trace. Such an audit log can be examined later on. However, it's the responsibility of the application itself to log appropriately. But more importantly, the data it logs for later must be well structured. Simply printing random words to a console is no longer sufficient. If you start doing logging by hand, you'll quickly build some homegrown abstraction. For example, every time you log something, the timestamp is a must. Otherwise, when looking at the logs later on, it's impossible to tell when things have happened. Timestamps also allow measuring the time elapsed between events. Another feature is some sort of persistence. Most likely, you'll redirect your logs to a file. Logging is pervasive and solves the same problems in pretty much all applications. So, small libraries flourished all over. You only need to think about the message you want to store for later. The logging library takes care of adding metadata like timestamps, current thread ID, logged user, delegating to some destination like console, file, or syslog, and choosing which log messages are important based on their level. Especially the last point is interesting. Developers can choose whether a certain log message is something critical or just some fine-grained debugging. A library can, sometimes dynamically, choose to drop less important stuff. On a busy server, multiple processes and threads are logging at the same time. Imagine you are handling hundreds of transactions per second, and each transaction produces hundreds of logs. Sadly, logs from different transactions interleave, making it impossible to track an individual transaction. So we must get clever. Fortunately, logging libraries help. These libraries attach thread ID by default, which may be sufficient. But more complex systems tend to create their tracing ID. Such ID works across threads and even systems. What does it mean? Well, let's say your transaction spans multiple applications. You can quickly discover all logs from all applications related to a single transaction. This is called distributed logging. You'll probably need some external tool to collect logs from applications and aggregate them in some searchable form. A popular ELK stack may be used for that. This common setup helps collect logs from several services in one place. It's a must for any distributed system. Another cool feature is called structured logging. Basically, rather than logging dump strings, we also log arbitrary key value pairs. It makes searching easier. For example, we can look for a string 123 being user ID, but not product ID. Logging is essential when troubleshooting issues on production. However, too much logging can become a problem. It may be expensive, especially when logs are saved to disk synchronously. Also, it may reveal sensitive information, for example, logging emails or passwords accidentally. And finally, it's yet another dependency that may be vulnerable. The last point applies to any library we depend on. However, recently an insanely dangerous zero-day vulnerability was found in Log4j, one of the most popular logging libraries in the wild. That's it. Thanks for listening. Bye.